they say that a man or a woman, no, they say that young men in particular, right? If that young man isn't crafting a goal consciously, the environment will dictate what that goal will be. And we as men are goal orientated, very much so. Humans are, but particularly men. So my environment dictated the goal. And again, we have deep-rooted psychological needs. And I was fulfilling some of those deep-rooted psychological needs, albeit unfruitfully.
Yeah.
It didn't lead to positive ends, but I was fulfilling a lot of my deep-rooted psychological needs through the selling and taking of drugs.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Apter Party podcast. My guest on today's show, Ross Anderson, is a public speaker who specialises in the world of health and wellbeing. Some of the areas that he specialises in include neuroscience, psychology, and sleep psychology. He also runs a business called Beyond Baseline, whose mission is to help people transform both professionally and personally. He works with a number of high-profile clients, including Nike, Dell, and the UFC, and I had a great time chatting to him, so I really hope you enjoy listening to the show. If you do enjoy listening to this episode, then please give us a like and subscribe. Please feel free also to share the episode either with your friends or on social media. And please also check out the episode sponsors, Paradeza. They're a cool Edinburgh-based clothing brand. I'll provide a link to their website in the show notes and the episode description. Thanks for listening and enjoy.
For anybody listening that doesn't already follow you or is now just being introduced to you for the first time through listening to this podcast, could you tell us a bit about yourself, your role as a public speaker, and the areas that you specialise in?
Sure. So, I guess for the last 9 years, I've been operating as an independent speaker, as you said, public speaker, keynote speaker, trainer, and consultant. When I say trainer, I mean on-stage trainer, not personal trainer, even though I did train as one in a past life. I've been doing that for maybe the last 9 years, working with athletes, organisations, small and large, and entrepreneurs. So, growth-orientated startups, small companies that have up to 1,000 staff, but also can have as little as 10 staff. And then your larger national and international companies, so the likes of, the UFC, Lululemon, Dell Technologies, Cisco Systems, some of those sorts of organisations. And that's been predominantly helping their people. Help them help their people. So every organisation, if you look at it purely from a business perspective, every organisation will have a purpose that they want to fulfill, and they'll have goals that they want to achieve and KPIs that they want to hit. But I come in and I'm dealing with people. I look at it more from a human-centred perspective. So they want their people to perform well, but ultimately, every human being has challenges, mentally, physically, caregiving responsibilities. Maybe one of their parents has just passed, maybe one of their parents is now in a home, so on and so forth. And so we come in with well-considered knowledge. I do, or my company does, well-considered knowledge. And the goal for us, though, is to help those individuals make change at the habitual level. So you and I, everybody listening, is just a unique bank of habits, some good, some bad, across the different domains of life. So our goal is to help those people become more empowered bank of habits and facilitate behavioural change. And ultimately, even though we focus more on the people, that usually, typically, takes care of the performance-based aims.
Amazing. Is that taking you to different parts of the world, or is this something that you've primarily been doing in the UK, or has this been more of a global thing for you?
In the beginning, it was very much just centred around Scotland, but now it's become more national and global. With Dell Technologies, for example, I was in something called the RBS Accelerator Program, which is like Dragon's Den, but not on steroids. If that makes sense. So you go in, you do a little pitch. If they like you, if you like your business ideas, then they'll bring you in and they offer you workshops. And it's quite humbling for me, to think I'd read a couple of books and watched some podcasts and thought I knew a bit about business. So it was humbling. But it was what I needed at that time with regards to entrepreneurship. And they give you some workshops, they give you the accountability, a little bit of coaching. But Dell Technologies were one of their partners. So I was like a dog with a bone. I want to do this corporate stuff. Because when I started doing the business stuff, it was me standing on stage at first, just timidly had these messages that I was really passionate about, that I wanted to perpetuate. And that was it. And I was getting some money, and I was working 3 or 4 jobs, to pay the bills as well.
Yeah.
And it naturally evolved, and I had this unique opportunity where Dell were there. They were part of the Entrepreneurial Accelerator program. They were a partner.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, how can I get involved with Dell? So I managed to muster up the confidence to ask for a meeting. And fortunately, I met a lady there. Her name was Amberine Campbell, who's now one of my good friends.
Mm-hmm.
And she believed in me. She saw something in me, and she's like, I believe you can help us. And I asked if they had a wellbeing week, and they didn't. And they'd done some typical lunch and learns, these sit-down sessions where a speaker comes in. But their uptake and their engagement wasn't much. Anyway, long story short, I said, look, I'll come and do a whole week for you guys. I don't need the price of a coffee. I don't need travel expenses. I don't need nothing. I'll come and do a whole week. And I delivered multiple sessions across multiple days.
Yeah.
And the engagement went from a couple of people coming along to like every session being oversubscribed.
Wow.
Hundreds of people turning up across the week. And that led to a bit of paid work here and there. And then ultimately, that I was meeting, it was at the end of the RBS Accelerator program was, you get 18 months of support. But at the end of the first 6 months, we had this Celebrate Your Successes party. And I was a wee bit hungover. I'm not going to lie. I was a wee bit hungover. I had a meeting with Dell the next day. You might say, well, that sounds a bit irresponsible. But I knew the 2 ladies that were showing up. I knew exactly what I had to do and what I had to say and what I was showing up for.
Yeah.
And that was to discuss a more blended approach throughout Scotland and maybe tapping into England as well.
Mm-hmm.
But then these 2 unknown entities show up, these ladies, and they ask for a long-winded introduction. I give it. And then at the end of that, they asked me to be their national ambassador for mental health and wellbeing. And then the week later, it all happened very quickly. The week later, I'm meeting Michael Dell, the 37th richest man in the world.
Wow.
I wasn't allowed to take my phone, social media blackout. And there was all these men in blacks, if you will. It's almost like MI5 agents peppered around the vicinity. And he comes in, pipered in, and he had this aura about him. He had a very presidential aura. Anyway, then it became kind of global as well. So I had some programs activated, if you will, on the Global Well at Dell platform.
Amazing.
And then, while I wouldn't say, everybody thinks, oh, you're Dell's national ambassador for mental health, you must be balling, financially. It wasn't like that. But it was worth its weight in gold with regards to how many doors it opened up, that title.
100%. I mean, it's such a large company.
Yeah.
So
160,000 staff internationally. It's changing now because Michael Dell, his tagline is innovation is everything, which I love. But now with the emergence of AI and where that's headed, it's probably going to be a substantial drop in those numbers.
Right.
But yeah, that opened up a load of doors for me. And then it's still, so I wouldn't say I'm international. I'm not Mr. 305? He's, what is he, Mr. International? Pitbull. But I haven't gone quite international yet. Next year, I do plan to do a lot more stuff in the Middle East and Australia and the US, because for years, my criminal record held me back. I only just got that sorted last year.
Yeah. Well, that is something that we can maybe talk about a little bit. I know we've kind of spoken a little bit off camera.
Yep.
A bit about the earlier part of your journey, which to me seems like one that was pretty far removed from one being centered around health and well-being.
Yep.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your story so far and how you got to where you are just now, how you got to the path that you're now on.
Sure. So, the smart ass stuff I think I'd mentioned to you before. So yes, while I'm a psychologist today, specialising in neuroscience, more of the practical psychology, not the psychoanalyzing you stuff, which everyone thinks you do when they say you're a psychologist. But, well-being science is what I call it. So neuroscience, sleep psychology, psychological disorders and positive psychology. And I'm very well versed in practical philosophy, blood work analysis, epigenetics, stuff like that. All things human flourishing. Registered member of the British Psychological Society, the European Union of Sleep. Still maintain my ties with Glasgow University's Neuroscience and Psychology Department. That all sounds very fanciful, but life was very different a number of years ago. When I was, I'm no Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, but I've travelled quite the distance in terms of success. like success can be measured in different ways, and that, you know, I like the line success is distance travelled. And so I don't come from nothing, but I don't come from much. You know, when I was younger, my parents separated. Dad was in and out of my life for a while, rejected me when I was 13. And that, well, I've made peace with that now. And actually, I'm very grateful for my father's absence now, which makes sound a bit odd, but I am.
Mm-hmm.
That caused me a lot of confusion when I was younger, and I had a lot of issues, daddy issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I acted up in part as a result of that. And there is a lot of value in having a mother and a father. You know, of course, you can have a mother and a father and they're not right for each other, and the at-home life is chaotic. But there is, across the board, a real value in having a mum and a dad. And I didn't. And my mum was great, but she only had, you know, a certain amount of capacity. My dad left, rejected me. And in school, I acted up in part as a result of that. You know, and I was on the behaviours cards. I was on the truancy cards or doggers cards, but can't say that now, can you? That's got other interesting connotations. And I was even putting a drugs card in school because I was caught selling it and smoking cannabis multiple times.
Really?
I don't know how I wasn't expelled, because I'd been suspended multiple times. And I say this jokingly, right, because I'm not proud of this, but it's the reality of how it was. But when I was in third year at high school, I had the record, which maybe it still stands, but I had the record for the largest number of ferals to guidance in a week.
Really?
Yeah, which caused one of my suspensions.
Yeah.
So I was just wild in school, but I was wild not because I was wild.
Yeah.
Not because of like my makeup or my psychology or something like that. I was wild because my dad had left and rejected me. And there was a void there. And I was also, if I look back now, I was kind of born to be an entrepreneur, but they don't teach that in school. They don't teach enterprise skills or entrepreneurial skills. So misguided energy is what I would call it. I didn't get to, you know, I left school. I didn't get to realise my academic potential. I didn't get to realise my athletic potential. And that's when a lot of my issues really became more pronounced. And I'd already been selling drugs and taking drugs. So when I left school, I bounced around from unfulfilling job to unfulfilling job, and that's when the drug dealing and drug taking intensified.
How did the drug dealing begin, and what sort of levels did you get to with that? The drug dealing and with drug taking?
I guess I'd need to be careful what I say there, but
of course,
in a sense.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is, so when I was younger, my uncle gave me cannabis at the age of 11, believe it or not, which is wild to me.
Yeah.
Because my sister has two sons, and one of them is about to turn 11. And my uncle at the time was around my age, so nearly 40. And I think how irresponsible is that? But the more I've learned about psychology, the more you learn about psychology, it makes you less liable to judge people for their actions, because you just see that they're a product of their circumstances and experiences. But anyway, at the time he did, it is the gateway drug, you know, especially if you're a curious little guy.
Yeah.
I was a very curious little guy, and I was very pro-risk, if you will. So when you have an unenriched environment, you're pro-risk and curious, it's not really a good recipe. So then, you know, started to take cannabis. I didn't have any. It was interesting for me because I was the only one of my peer group that had a younger sister. Most of my friends had older brothers. They had multiple older brothers. So I was 11. So my birthday's a February. So I was the youngest person in my school, in my year, sorry.
It's the cut off. I'm March, so I was one of the oldest.
I had friends that were like a whole year older than me.
Yeah.
So I was the youngest out of all my friends. And then they had bigger brothers who had bigger brothers again. So I lived in a village in the back arse of nowhere. And I was exposed to all these boys. I was running about with guys who are 15, 18, 21.
Yeah.
Very impressionable. No dad around. And there was all, you know, it's a bit different now because of the internet and iPads and podcasts and, you know, technological advancements. But the spirit of the times for me was dance music, rave music, hip hop. You must be smoking cannabis. You must be taking ecstasy. You must be doing these things, playing football.
Yeah.
Or let's just call it what it is. You're called gay. You're a poofter. You're ostracized. You're not part of the group. And everyone psychologically, we have deep-rooted psychological needs as people.
Yeah.
We need to feel a sense of belonging and connection to something. So, to answer your question, I very much got into, by the time I was 15, I had taken every drug you could imagine. Cannabis, ecstasy, cocaine, heroin. And they say that a man or a woman, they say that young men in particular, right? If that young man isn't crafting a goal consciously, the environment will dictate what that goal will be. And we as men are goal orientated, very much so. Humans are, but particularly men. So my environment dictated the goal. And again, we have deep-rooted psychological needs. And I was fulfilling some of those deep-rooted psychological needs, albeit unfruitfully.
Yeah.
It didn't lead to positive ends, but I was fulfilling a lot of my deep-rooted psychological needs through the selling and taking of drugs. So when I wouldn't just take a line of speed. I would be like taking a line of speed, a line of ecstasy, a line of cocaine, just because I realised it got a reaction, a response. When you become known for that, that's not great.
Yeah.
But it's funny when you're younger. It's silly. You get a reaction. But again, you're fulfilling something. It's like, oh, cool. I feel something here. And then particularly selling drugs. I didn't just sell drugs. I sold Viagra, Camagra, counterfeit clothes, fake Ray-Bans, and then every drug you can imagine. And I know a lot of young guys in the UK, especially in the west of Scotland, will dabble in it, taking it and selling it. But I did quite a lot of it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm Pablo Escobar or whatever, obviously, but I was in quite deep. And I found myself in real tricky situations fast. The first couple of years are fine and fun. You're the guy that's getting the girls and getting the lassies and whatnot, and you've got the drugs, you've got the this, the that, and people come to you and phone you, and you have that, again, deep-rooted psychological needs. You've got that. You've got the resources there. You've got the prestige, the respect to a degree. So it becomes validating, fulfilling, and you're progressing. Every human being wants to self-actualize and progress. I would just progress in an unfruitful way, down an unfruitful path.
Yeah, definitely. And what you mentioned earlier there was interesting. You were talking about, your friends had big brothers and big cousins, or I think you maybe said that. But I kind of got it from what you were saying there. Were you looking at these guys as your sort of male role models? Was that what was happening there? You mentioned that your mum and dad had parted ways. Some of what you said resonated with my sort of teenage years. I remember, I'll admit it here, I might regret this later on. My mum might give me a bit of stick for this one, but I remember being peer pressured into smoking my first joint when I was 11. Now, I certainly didn't get involved in anything as heavy as heroin, but I definitely, my mum and dad split up when I was really young. I was only 2. I definitely looked at the older guys in my area as sort of male role models, and definitely felt that I would look up to them and be influenced by what they were up to, and can really relate to some of what you were saying with some of that stuff. Was that similar for you? Did you feel like...
So I wouldn't say I thought of them as male role models, because I didn't even know what a male role model was.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I surrounded myself with a lot of them. Yeah. And it felt good to be in their company. And, personal development 101, you are a product of the 5 people you spend most of your time with. Yeah. Habits aren't taught, they're caught. And so, that's all that was available to me. To go outside of the village was like, what? When you're 10 to 16, to get into Glasgow when you're 16, back in our era, was like, whoa, that was a big deal. Yeah. So you're limited to what you know, and have you ever heard of the philosophy called solipsism?
No.
Solipsism is basically you live your life through your perceptual field. So when from my perspective, when I leave here and walk out this room, you guys don't exist. So I'm living solipsistically through my field of view. Obviously, when you become a mature individual and an adult, you become more worldly. You understand there's more beyond you. But at that time, I was living solipsistically, if that makes sense. I was limited by my geographical environment. And so then you're limited by your conditioning, your programming, your environment. And so I was spending time with these guys. I didn't know any better. And we're just, again, deep-rooted psychological needs. You're navigating your way through life based on an unconscious attempt, a subliminal attempt to fulfill certain deep-rooted needs, to bond, to feel, to connect, to acquire assets, to evolve and progress. I didn't know that was what's happening, because it happens unconsciously. But yeah, I did, lean into their company as a result of those needs.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, it seems like a big part of what it is that you're doing and the core value in what it is that you're doing, you really want to help people, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions here that I've kind of prepared that I wanted to ask you that I feel like might be useful for people that are listening. They'll maybe be able to pick up some tips and things that will help them in their own journey towards health and well-being and whatnot. But the first thing I want to ask you was, what are the foundations and pillars of health and well-being? What would you consider the foundations and pillars of those?
I mean, the goalposts have moved in this day and age with regards to that question a little bit, because we need to set a new standard now. And what I mean by that is, in the past, you should be optimizing your biological fundamentals, right? You don't need to think like that. That sounds a bit sequential and clinical, and that's how I look at it now. But I'm just talking about, you should be dialing in how you eat, how you move, and how you sleep. And then on top of that, you want to be training your mind. So, Kieran, I have delivered all these keynotes now, and it baffles me that I think 500 keynotes plus in the last 10 years to audiences, as large as 1,000 to as small as 10. So let's just say tens of thousands of people. And I've asked the question multiple times over, who in here does some form of physical training? And, whether it's, you do a lot of jiu-jitsu, spin fit, boxing, high rocks and whatever, CrossFit and speed walk and whatever it may be for you, who in here does some form of regular daily physical training? Probably about 60 to 70% of the room raises their hand. But the follow-up question has a different response. Who in here does some form of regular daily mental training? No matter where asked that question, when asked that question, the response is the same. On average, about 2 to 5% of people train their minds.
Wow.
There's probably a slightly higher percentage actually do it because they've never heard of it being referenced in that way, and they're maybe doing it unintentionally, accidentally. But, there's an obvious disparity there between physical training and mental training. And something I realised, 100% of our lives is lived through our minds. But yet, on average, 2 to 5% of people train their minds.
What would something be that would be considered mental training? Would it be meditation or?
A good conversation like this.
Yeah.
Listening to it, being part of it.
Yeah.
I've found as I've gotten older, men in particular naturally gravitate toward philosophising about life. I don't know if you've found that. I've certainly found that when they hit 28, 27, 28, there's obviously some variance there, but it happens naturally when I get together with friends, connections, new connections. You and I, that's what we were doing.
100%.
You talk about politics, you talk about the economy, you talk about business, you talk about work, you talk about morals, you talk about, do you have a family, the future, the landscape of life right now. That is a form of mental training. For me, if I define it, people will see then that they are actually doing it, but you want to be consciously doing it, It's like if I walk from here to my car, which is parked maybe a mile away, I'm physically training, right? But I'm not consciously thinking that I'm physically training. So with mental training, think mental training is the umbrella term, right? The umbrella term. Then beneath that, you have forms of mental training. You have their associated practices and their corresponding benefits. So forms of mental training, associated practices, corresponding benefits. Each form of mental training you experience, it's like it opens up rooms in your house you never knew existed, which changes the lens you see the world through and how you show up in the world. So as an example, emotional intelligence, self-awareness, but practical examples would be reading books, reflecting, journaling, going on a course, all these sorts of things, long-form meditation, a silent retreat, a male growth retreat. And in some senses, physical endeavours, mind feeds body, body feeds mind. So, for example, in 2019, I broke a burpee world record.
You broke a burpee world record?
Long story, but that journey, even though it's quite physical, it was very psychological too, because the belief that gave me, most people, when you ask them about burpees, they go, oh, they once. I don't even think I could do 10 in a minute. You could. that's a limiting belief.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, when you push yourself so far physically, your mind obviously develops also. So there's loads of different nuances to mental training.
Setting goals and achieving goals almost, is that?
It's a form of mental training.
Yeah.
Because you can, in order to do something you've never done, you have to become someone you've never been. So if you set yourself a physical goal, I know that you're really into jiu-jitsu, whether it's, okay, I'm a beginner, I want to be a blue belt, or I want to compete in my first competition. You know, I spoke about my first experience with grappling. I'm not a particularly big guy, 155, 165, 9 on a good day. And my first experience of that was getting chucked around by a 115-pound girl. Humbling.
Very humbling.
That in itself is a bit of mental training.
Yeah.
You know? So there's so much to talk about when it comes to mental training, but hopefully that gives you enough of an insight. And I say, just to finish my point there, I mentioned the goalposts have moved. We live in a very interesting time right now where we're developing the playbook on how to operate with social media and technological devices.
Yeah, very interesting, right? I mean,
that's what I mean by, for me, stillness and detachment is the number one thing people should be focusing on right now. And I think I'm going to push for it politically. I'm going to push for it across social media. I think we need to be teaching younger people, and when I say younger, I mean people who are 25 years or less. We need to give them, it's our duty as human beings to give them a reference point for what life looks like before social media and technological devices.
I agree completely. With that. I watched the programme on Channel 4 a few months ago. I'm sure you probably watched it as well. I forget the girl's name, or the couple's name that were...
was it the one? I haven't watched it, but the one with the guy from Busted and his wife that used to present Emma Willis and Matt Willis. I haven't watched it actually, but I saw it. I saw it advertised. Really
interesting. They did an experiment where they take mobile phones off of kids in a high school for, I think it was for 2 weeks, maybe. They take the phones and they lock them away. And they kind of study their experience over the course of the 2 weeks, and they speak to different doctors and psychologists about the effects that mobile phones and social media are having on young people. They also go and speak to some families of young people that have unfortunately died as a result of being influenced by YouTube or cyberbullying and whatnot. It's a really, really interesting program, definitely worth a watch. But
did we live in unprecedented times? See if you actually, here's a mental exercise. Let's just zoom out on life right now.
Yeah.
We've gone from fire to light bulb to TVs to these omnipresent devices in the last 150 years.
Yeah.
How long have humans existed?
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
And so if you think about it in that sense, again, we're developing the playbook. And I really, really love, so when you get exposed to psychology, there's over 80 forms of psychology, believe it or not, atypical, developmental, conceptual and historical issues within psychology, cognitive, memory, all sorts, even sleep psychology, one of my expert areas. There's a new emerging field called interference psychology, and it deals with all of this, it explores all of this. And if you look at the average person today, the average 13 to 35-year-old today spends upwards of 4.5 hours consuming media, both traditional and social. And it's not needle moving stuff that's going to improve your life. It's, you know, doom scrolling, browser blackout, app amnesia, unnecessary consumption of toxic content. And what we know, psychologically speaking, as media consumption, this bad stuff goes up, so too does your chances of experiencing anxiety, as an example.
Yeah.
But then, fortunately, there's the opposite of that. As you drop it, your chances of experiencing anxiety go down significantly. And, you know, 4.5 hours of your waking day is almost a third of your waking day.
That's crazy.
That means a third of your life then is being frittered away. So there has to be some new legislation. There has to be, I feel like don't think of myself as a leader in that sense, but I think people need to be talking about these things more.
Definitely.
And I'm really passionate about it, especially since I've become a father. You become more worldly. And I'm also fatherly to 2 other young males. So my sister's 2 little boys, because their fathers are, well, one of them, my sister's kids to 2 different males. So, you know, one of them is absent, not the best. And the other one, doesn't think the way I think. You know, he's not as worldly, even though he's a good dad. So I feel like I'm like a dad to them. And almost, and you know, I'm always trying to be the me that I never had also. So you think about those you're close to, you think about your kids, you think about the community, you think about, the world at large. We need some stringent, we need a new playbook.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, we've all experienced that doom scrolling, the way that these apps
I do it too.
On a Sunday, I'm not really much of a drinker these days, but I think if I'd been out on a Saturday night and had a few drinks, could quite easily wake up, look at my phone in the morning, and next thing I know, 2 hours have gone past and I've just been sat doom scrolling. But the way that these things are designed, they're designed to keep your attention, to keep you hooked on. We're living in the attention economy.
Exactly. I talk about all the time. You've got to remember that, while these people that develop these apps and these systems, I don't believe they're inherently bad. But what I do know for sure is that they don't have your well-being, not just yours, your children's or connections, those you love and lead's well-being as a priority, you know? And it's all about driving up the sales price and increasing their bottom line. And we have to be aware of that, because they've got psychologists and neuroscientists who have, a depth of skill on their books, who have an understanding of your every psychological, vulnerability, and they capitalize on that. Yeah. And so now we have to learn to create degrees of separation, which I'm currently writing a book. It's been happening over the last year or two, but I'm trying to develop systems and success frameworks for us to operate within this time, more effectively when it comes to these, because we're all operating like addicted users.
Yes.
I think it's the silent addiction, the worst silent addiction. You've got pornography, you've got drugs, you've got alcohol, you've got all the others. But the worst one, in my opinion, is this silent one, because it's become so normal, and it's becoming even more normal. We have to really change that.
Definitely. It has become so normalized. You're right. Yeah. It has become completely normalized. I mean, in your opinion then, what would be some realistic and achievable strategies for people to sort of manage to get themselves off of social media, or manage to get their behaviors a little bit more healthy around that?
Yep. Two things come to mind. First, perform a little experiment. Pretend you're an experimenter. Throw on your metaphorical goggles and your lab coat. Embrace you're in an Einstein, right? So a hypothesis in psychology, we call it a hypothesis, right? Just an idea. So this experiment is an idea. You're going to try something new, and you're going to make the connection between how you feel, the habit, and how you feel. So as an example, right? Everyone is starting at a different stage with regards to their addiction to devices. For some people, the first degree of separation might be, going to the toilet and sitting on the pan without their phone.
Yeah.
Or going for a walk. We all do it. We're all guilty of it. Let's be honest, right? But going to the toilet pan without your phone, going a walk for 30 minutes, going and grab go walk to Tesco's or Waitrose or whatever it is, get your shopping bags and go get some exercise in too, and walk for 20 minutes there, grab your stuff 20 minutes back without your phone. Some people even take their phone in the shower these days,
Wow.
So it's like little mini wins, micro wins.
Yeah.
But then I would also say I love to experiment, and I love to push the boat. And whether it's a week-long water fast, things that I've experimented with before, or the burpee world record, or a year without alcohol, it gives you a different frame of reference. So the one that I would mention would be have a weekender. Not a weekender bender, but a weekender without your phone.
Without your phone.
Or 24-hour fast. Turn it off. You will probably feel a bit agitated for a while, but a true TBD, turn back time, TBT. Pretend you're living in the 90s again, or the 2000s, or just, a phone funeral, if you will, a funeral. Put your phone in lock it up, put it somewhere. Take 24 hours away for it, or a full weekend. What happens when you do that? And I can speak from experience here, is that you settle into it after a while, you become more present, and you start to experience life in a different way, and you then realise the error of your ways, that you've been operating like an addicted user.
Yeah.
And you can then get to the point where you can go on holiday for a full week without your phone, and life feels wholesome.
Yeah.
Life feels new. It feels beautiful. It feels fresh. So it's about obviously identifying where you're at and what you're comfortable with, and always looking for many wins.
Definitely. What about sleep? You mentioned sleep earlier on. This is one of your areas of expertise. How important is sleep, and what are the effects on mental and physical health with good quality sleep versus bad quality sleep or not enough sleep?
So what we know about sleep psychology, or what we know from sleep psychology or sleep science, is when your sleep drops below, durationally speaking, there's obviously a conversation of quality, but when your sleep, durationally speaking, drops below 7 hours, that's when we start to see the negative adverse effects of sleep kick in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they might not always be obvious to you, meaning you know, they're not, you don't wear them, you know, they're happening under the threshold of conscious awareness, under the hood of you, if that makes sense. But that's what we're finding, you know, is 7 hours seems to be the minimal required amount for most people. Now, you might get some people that might like to play devil's advocate and say, well, I've been operating for a decade now on 4.5 to 5.5 hours of sleep. Well, you might be operating on that. You might be abusing caffeine to survive that, but you're not thriving. And I can offer some rationale there. So they're not, if you look at people that think they can survive on 4 or 5 hours of sleep per night for a decade plus, maybe they can, because they're only 17 to 27, right? Because I remember being 17 to 27, I could have got shot and gone to work. You know what I mean? It's different when you hit 35, 45, 55 and beyond. It really is, especially when you add kids into the mix and the responsibilities of life. But for those who think that they don't need 7 hours, I'll give you a little insight. So there are a number of people that have a gene called the DEC2 gene, DEC2 gene. Outliers. So the best way to remember it is, you know, Ant and Dec, that comedic coupling. There's 2 of them, right? I don't think they're that funny. But anyway, Ant and Dec, there's 2 of them, the DEC2 gene. It's also known as the family of short sleepers gene. So if you have that genetic variant, right, you don't experience as much of the psychological and physiological negative adverse effects. You can operate on, I think it's roughly 6 hours of sleep without the ill effects. But here's the issue. The number of people that have that gene. I'll ask you, if you were to consider the whole of the UK and you have to round the number of people that have that genetic variant to the nearest whole number and express it as a percentage, what do you think the answer would be?
I'm going to guess like 5% or something like that.
Zero. Closer to 0 than it is 1.
Wow.
You're more likely, statistically speaking, you're more likely to get struck by lightning and killed than to have this particular gene variant.
Wow.
Now, granted, caveat, there are some other gene variants.
Yeah.
But I would say only around about 10% of the UK populace, or the worldly global Western populace, have these gene variants that render them unimpacted by less than 7 hours of sleep.
There are definitely more people who believe that they are one of these outliers than there are, because I've spoken to loads of people who think, oh no, like 5 hours sleep, 6 hours sleep, like I'm fine.
But are they aware of what's going on under the threshold of conscious awareness cellularly? That's the thing. And also, remember, people's standards are different.
Yeah.
And we can be accustomed, if it's trickled in, we can be accustomed with a lower vibration, a lower energy, a lower psychological acuity.
Yeah.
You know, people come to me and they're like, you get so much energy. You know, I don't drink coffee. I've been caffeine free since I was 23.
Yeah.
So part of that is because I focus on getting good quality sleep. Now, I've got a little girl. She's about to turn 4. Obviously, you don't always get good sleep, durationally speaking, but I tried to get, you know, the problems of life aren't the problems. The problems are that we don't have the tools to deal with the inevitable challenges when they arise. So I've got some tools that enable me to get quality sleep.
Maybe
you know, focus on the quality.
Yeah, maybe.
But just to finish up that point, under the threshold of conscious awareness, you know, we know that even just one bad night of sleep classified as 5.5 hours. There's been research conducted by Michael Prather and his team at California University, which has been since corroborated. Even one night of bad sleep classified as 5.5 or defined as 5.5 hours is enough to drop your body's natural killer cells. I'll explain what those are in just a moment. Your natural killer cells by as much as 50%.
Wow.
So 50% natural killer cells are our body's first lines of defense against threat from viruses, bacteria, and cancerous cells.
Wow.
It's like they're like the James Bonds of the body. So whenever they identify something harmful, they combat that, right? So when you have one bad night of sleep, half of them take the day off.
Wow.
And that leaves you somewhat immunologically suppressed.
Yeah.
So then that means you're likely to catch a cold, catch a bacterial infection, in some area of your body, and you're more likely, more prone over time, if that's happened consecutively, to experience things like cancer. Now, obviously, what I'm not saying, I've got to be clear on that, I'm not saying one bad night of sleep is going to cause cancer. You get the compounding effect over years and decades, but it just goes to show that, people have got colds and flus all the time. And another interesting fact, we'll move on to solutions, is that the average person in the UK right now sleeps, if you round that to the nearest whole number, 6 hours. So that's 1 hour less than the minimum required threshold, which means they are somewhat immunologically compromised. Not heavily, just a little, but enough to be dealing with colds and flus more often than they should.
Yeah.
Enough to, maybe it's triggering some low level autoimmune issues or what, So
yeah,
people have a certain standard. It's about what standard do you want.
That's it. That's massive. I mean, if the average person in the UK is 1 hour below
Less.
that threshold of what's considered adequate.
And also, we just experienced daylight savings time, where the clocks go forward and we lose an hour. So to show you the impact of, just to culminate this point, I guess, when it comes to sleep and why I'm very bullish on getting good quality sleep, we just lost an hour, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that means that the average person in the UK is sleeping 6 hours durationally. We just lost an hour. What we see globally, predictably, is that when the clocks go forward and we lose an hour, we see globally a 24% increase in heart attacks.
Jeez, that's crazy.
That's
massive.
Because when our sleep drops, durationally speaking, our sleep is compromised, our blood pressure increases and our CRP increases. CRP is C-reactive protein, which is a biomarker. Biomarkers, if you do blood work, biomarkers are little information, data points on you and your health status.
Mm-hmm.
CRP gives you an indication of how systemically inflamed you are, and systemic inflammation is correlated with all-cause mortality, with the exception of accidental death.
Wow.
So you're sleep compromised, 7 hours is optimal for most.
Yeah.
6 hours, 5 hours, your blood pressure is increasing by as little as 5 points to as much as 30 points. That's significant. Plus there's an increase in your inflammatory markers. If you've been damaging your body or you have genetic predispositions, that could be the thing that causes,
that leads
to, obviously, again, being
Yeah.
clear, I'm not saying one bad night of sleep will cause a heart attack. I'm just saying over time, it shows the impact and the value of good quality sleep.
Of course. With that being said, are there any tips or healthy habits, ways that you could recommend people optimize their sleep?
Yes. So for health in general, you want to know where you're beginning, what your baseline is. I mean, my company's called Beyond Baseline, so I'm using a bit of a company relevant term here, but if you want to see how tall a building will be or how robust a building will be, first look at how deeply the foundations have been dug. So you want to establish strong fundamentals. I always encourage people to go for blood work and figure out what's going on under the threshold of conscious awareness. You know, if you want to optimize someone's mood, look under the hood. You know, so start there, get some blood work if you can. If you can't, you can't afford it, you can get it for 250, 300 quids. Still quite a lot of money for some. So if you can't, I would say start dialing in how you eat, how you move, how you sleep, your biological fundamentals. That's your lowest hanging fruit. It's going to create a lot of bang for your buck, if that makes sense. So with sleep, some of the best things that you can do for sleep weight, a consistent, this is hard for many people, but a consistent sleep-wake cycle, it's the non-sexiest answer. You know, don't mess it up at the weekend. You know, you want to be, if you're waking up at 6 every morning and going to bed at 10, you don't want to be, when it comes to a Saturday or a Sunday, you don't want to be waking up at 9 and going to bed at 2. Because what you're doing is you're deconditioning your biological cycle, your circadian rhythm.
Yeah.
So you can condition it or decondition it. And you want to be keeping it nice and consistent. You want to be exposing yourself to light in the first third of the day. And in the evening, you know, look at the difference between 2025, because it's not 2024, but look at the difference between 2025 and 1925 with regards to artificial light exposure, you know. So you want to be creating a digital curfew, you know. Throw on blue block and light glasses. I call them condoms for the eyes, right? Because condoms prevent little accidents from happening, right?
Yeah.
Blue block and light glasses, they do two things. They change the intensity of the light coming into the eye and the color of the light experienced by the eye to be more in alignment with sunset and sunrise. And like condoms prevent little accidents from happening, blue blocking light glasses, they prevent your daytime hormones, cortisol, elevating, upregulating at nighttime when you want your nighttime hormones, melatonin, increasing and upregulating in the evening, because then you go to bed tired and wired if you don't do that.
I like that analogy.
So stick on some blue blocking light glasses. You might feel like a bit of a wally at first. They're 20, 30 pounds. You stick them on and you don't create yourself a physiological challenge. You allow your nighttime hormones, melatonin, to increase in the evening when they should be, where they should be sort of upregulating, and your daytime hormones, cortisol, the vigilance hormone, to diminish, so that you can go to bed, rest, and have a restful and restorative night of sleep. And again, you could just detach from your devices. So those would be a couple of quick things. Amazing.
Definitely useful tips. When we were talking off camera, you mentioned something along the lines to me about you said something like you're not happy with the current state of men's health and well-being today. So what did you mean by this?
So I mean, one of my drivers is just human flourishing in general. I had to find a lot of the answers that I've found. I've had a lot of questions, and it took me. I had to experience a lot of unnecessary suffering to find the answers to those questions. And a little suffering is good, like the suffering that's attached to a positive outcome, a workout. But there's a lot of unnecessary suffering going on. So to answer your question, universally, I want to. All this stuff that I've learned, I want to share that with humans, because there's a lot. Less than 5% of our global Western curriculum is dedicated to health, well-being science, psychological flourishing. So it's no wonder we're suffering unnecessarily or just failing to realise our potential. But with men in general, right now I'm seeing a dip in resilience. I'm seeing a lot of loneliness, and I don't think the standard is what I'm talking about. Not necessarily just health and well-being. I just think the standard of modern working class and middle class man is not where it needs to be. And I want to help elevate that. I've got a daughter. I'm going to marry her off. I've got nieces. I've got nephews. I realise that it's all about habits. Gandhi says, be the change you want to see in the world. So I want to help. I want to be the best I can be. And I want to help others set a new precedent, a new standard. So, a rising tide lifts all ships, if you will, or it should. And so I just see men being challenged in this day and age heavily for a number of reasons, multifactorial, but I want to play a part in that. There's a lot of communities out there. There's business focused communities, there's fitness communities, there's recovery communities, but where's the communities that focus on facilitating growth biologically, psychologically, spiritually, and financially? A balanced community. And so that's what I started with Betterman, which is a branch of my company Beyond Baseline. We launched a community, no cost to low cost of events throughout Scotland, and we'll be spanning into England as well. But then also we launched a retreat too.
Do you want to talk to us a little bit about the retreat? It's coming up in
Marbella in June. Yeah. So, the community exists to facilitate growth across all of those domains, shoulder to shoulder transformation. The retreat is that on steroids. So it's taking a group of guys away, and it has all the quintessential elements of a retreat. It's got the fancy villa, it's got the tennis court, it's got those holiday brochure moments and experiences, but it's not just 3 days and done. When we bring the guys in, when they sign up, I want to create resilience groups and deepen those bonds. So they meet up, we do pre-webinars, we deepen those bonds during the retreat, and there's continuity of that, because if you look at the global blue zones, so blue zones are regions that house the largest number of centenarians, people that live to 100 and they're healthy with it. Yeah. One of the 9 key elements that connects all of these people is that they have resilience groups. In one region, they call it a Moai, And I want to create these Moais, these resilience groups. So it's not just 3 days and done, it's a continuity of that relational capital. Then when they come, yes, I love fitness. Yes, I love the spiritual side of things, but ours is more balanced with the wellbeing science, the psychology, the transformational coaching. It's also about who you rub shoulders with when you're there. I said earlier on that some of the greatest advances in my life have come through meeting people that are 3, 4, 5 rungs more advanced than me in some stage of life. So if you're the fittest in the room, smartest in the room, find a new room. So I've tapped into some of the best people in my network and brought them along to speak. UFC athletes, Paul Craig. You've got business behemoths, the guy who built Gymshark, Paul Richardson. Myself and Dr. Alka Patel are performing a bit of a double act. She's a longevity scientist to teach new frameworks, success frameworks. And I would be there too to learn myself. And then the cohort of the guys that have signed up, they're all like-minded, growth-orientated, health-conscious, health-curious, seeking community and adventure. And for me, a pause is a transformative experience. If you want to go fast in life, you have to go a bit slow down, take a moment.
Amazing. It sounds absolutely wicked. Are there, if anybody that's listening would be interested in going, are there spaces left? How could they find out a bit more
We
about
close the
it?
doors in 10 days. We've got 2 spots left to fulfill. We've got a couple of conversations to be had. So there's time maybe for a few people to dip in last minute. It's happened June 10th to June 13th in Marbella. And by design, you want the sun, but it's not too far from the UK.
Yeah.
And there'll be opportunities for those entrepreneurs and ambitious professionals to check in twice a day because they run businesses and they have families. But yeah, they can connect with me on LinkedIn, Ross Anderson, Man in the Cap, or a Bunnet on LinkedIn, or Ross Anderson Official on Instagram, or beyond_baseline_.
Amazing. One last thing I want to ask you, just before we wrap up for the day. Obviously, you mentioned there your business Beyond Baseline.
Yes.
Sort of dedicated to professional and personal transformation, helping people. I noticed that your mission statement is to help, is it 1 million?
1 million people.
Lives by 2030. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that, how you see that being achievable and what your aim is there?
Of course, you don't always hit every goal. Not to say that I won't, but you want to aim high. I want to help 1 million people. I live every day to be the me that I never had, in a sense, right? Whether it's, I needed a father figure, whether it was drugs, whether it's, navigating entrepreneurship, with health, with sleep, with whatever. I have a particular skill set, not to sound too much like Liam Neeson, but I've got a particular set of skills, and I don't know everything, but I know a lot about a little. And I think it's your duty as a person to give back, and life's a bit more than just you. And I've found that actually that's the good stuff, is deep and meaningful relationships, personal development, and community contributions. And so I want to help 1 million people. It sounds like a sexy number. Why not? It's cool. But I plan to do that. I've spent the last 9 years developing a craft and an ability to deliver that craft on stage so people can understand it. I didn't always speak the way I speak. It took a lot of hard work and effort. But the bigger picture is to have some sort of digital platform, which I'm looking at right now. After the retreat, sit down, digital platform, and then also a physical space, a haven, if you will, to future-proof people against life's ills and, technological advances, detachment-free, EMF-free, social media-free spaces, because I think that's going to be very important going forward.
Amazing. That all sounds great. Listen, we're kind of running out of time here, but I've really enjoyed speaking to you today.
Me too. I've enjoyed speaking to you too.
I was excited to chat to you. I feel like I could chat to you for so much longer. We could do it again at some point if you're interested. We could do a part 2.
If it goes down well, sure, 100%.
Definitely. I hope the retreat goes really well.
Thanks, brother.
And thank you very much for coming on. All right.
Thanks for the platform, mate. I appreciate it.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
Kieran.
Cheers.